Hello, and welcome to Talking Till Dawn. I'm Martin, and this episode I'm not joined by my good pal and co-host Michael Whitehouse. He's been tied up with a few things, but don't worry, he's well and everything. He's just got some stuff going on that's meant the scheduling didn't quite line up for this month, but he'll be back with us, I'm sure, for the next episode. I was of two minds whether to go ahead with this episode solo. We did release a Patreon bonus episode publicly as a promotional thing, so I guess we could have got away with it. If you've been with us for a while, you'll know that we have occasionally skipped a month when other priorities have popped up, but I've actually taken a few days off work for family stuff and ended up with a wee bit more free time than I expected, so I figured why not keep the ball rolling while I have the chance. I hope that's not too much of a jarring format change. I know Mike is a well-loved, integral part of the show. As I say, I expect him to be back with us as soon as he can. Before we crack on, I want to say hello and a very warm welcome to our new supporters on Patreon. Belladonic Hazy Janelle, I do hope that's your real name, I love it, joined us at the Nightbird level, thanks so much for that. And Lauren Morell, a long-time listener and commenter on our Ghastly Tales stuff, joined us at the Dawn Star level. Fantastic stuff. Lauren, I know you've sent us some UFO stuff to look at, some really interesting stuff. I'm sorry I haven't got back to you on that yet. I wanted to make sure I was able to give it the consideration it deserves and give proper feedback on what I think you could be looking at there. I've had my head filled with research for this episode for the past week or so, but I promise I'll try and get to it soon, probably after this episode is out. But thank you both for your support. We're grateful for every single listener we have, whether or not they support us on Patreon, but we are just delighted at the support we've received over on Patreon. I know I speak for Mike in that too. We do have hosting fees, we do have hardware costs as we try and improve our production value. We do spend dozens of hours each month researching and producing our episodes, so the support is absolutely fantastic and incredibly well appreciated. Thanks again, everyone. So this month I wanted to cover a different kind of mystery, a different kind of curiosity, something a bit different to the death and horror of the World's End murders the last couple of episodes. I think most people listening will be familiar with the concept of lost media. Lost films, lost episodes of TV programs, lost music. In a time when it often seems like any piece of media we could ever want is right at our fingertips via YouTube or streaming or less legal means, when the very idea of rarity, of unavailability, seems like a quaint, old-fashioned idea. It's fascinating that there are pieces of popular media, in some cases very popular media in their own times, that we can't access now. Sometimes that's because the value of the work wasn't seen at the time. This is what happened to many lost television episodes. They were seen as ephemera, one-off assets that had their tapes recorded over with newer programs when newer stuff was coming out. Sometimes it's because the original film materials were destroyed, intentionally or accidentally, in the days before there were millions of copies floating around on home media. Sometimes because a creator deliberately suppressed their own work, or it got tied up in legal wrangling, or only got a tiny release and no known copies survive. The fact that there are films we can't watch, shows we can't binge, songs we can't listen to, in an era where scarcity itself is scarce, these things take on an almost legendary aura, and for some, they become a subject of obsessive research and investigation. It's like for something to be lost and forgotten, there's almost a wrong there to be righted, you know? There is a flip side to lost media too. Media that has been discovered, that we have recordings of, sometimes by unknown or mysterious means, but whose origins, whose provenance, whose identity really remains veiled in mystery and controversy. In the last couple of years, a new term has been coined online to describe media, particularly music, falling under that banner, which is now also the name of a subreddit dedicated to researching and identifying this unknown ephemera. Lostwave. Tonight I'm going to discuss the OG Lostwave song, a recording surrounded by mystery, obsession, lies, intrigue and 80s nostalgia. A track known as the most mysterious song on the internet. Sometime in the early to mid-80s, probably late 1984, though we can't be 100% certain, in the town of Wilhelmshaven in West Germany, a young man known to us as Darius S. taped a song off the radio. In the days before Spotify, YouTube, file sharing, this was a common enough thing to do. Bored teenagers would spend nights with their fingers hovering over the record button on the stereo, waiting for an interesting new song or an old favourite to get some airplay. This happened both as a means of building up a low-cost music library and a sort of collectorish hobby. Darius was a prime example of this. According to an interview on the website spontis.de, he accumulated about 40 to 50 cassette tapes worth of radio-recorded songs around this period, all carefully re-edited into compilations using a second tape recorder, with the DJ intros trimmed out and with neatly typed up insert cards listing song titles and timestamps. I know this sounds weird. I promise you, listeners, in the 80s and early 90s, this wasn't as anarchy as it sounds today. It's just that if you wanted something like a Spotify-style playlist, it was a labour-intensive thing to put together with the technology of that time. The selection of songs reflected Darius's own taste and the genres that were popular in that part of Europe at the time. The Cure, Depeche Mode, Simple Minds, a lot of synth pop and post-punk, new wave, a bit of experimental stuff. And there was one such track, on tape 4, side 1, a cold, melodic, melancholic, strangely bouncy, ever so slightly eerie little earworm of a song. A song that Darius logged on the insert as Blind the Wind, which appears to be an interpretation of the first lyric rather than necessarily an official title, and in place of the artist's name, only a single solitary question mark. Now, the way Darius logged the details of the songs he recorded, there were quite a few with missing artist names or misrendered titles. Corey Hart's song Sunglasses at Night is typed as I Wear Sunglasses at Night. Legendary Pink Dot's Love Puppets is given as I Need You because that's a lyric at the end of the song. And that's to be expected. It's 1984. There's limited access to information compared to what we're used to today. Darius relied on his own knowledge and on introductions given by the DJ to get the titles for his recordings, and sometimes the DJ wouldn't give a title or Darius would miss it. So initially, Blind the Wind, as he called it, was only one of a number of mystery songs in Darius's collection, and there appeared to be nothing particularly stand out about it. In fact, to begin with, Darius had 25 unknown tracks, which he then compiled into a single collection called Unknown Pleasures, which he named after Joy Division's debut album. I'm guessing from this he was making mixtapes and stuff to share with friends. It became a little bit of a mission for Darius to try and track down the names of these songs. In 2004, Darius's sister Lydia bought him a web domain for his birthday. At first, Darius was unsure what to use it for, and then he remembered that compilation of nameless songs. He began the process of digitizing his collection and uploading short snippets of his unknown pleasures for the world to hear, in the hopes that the internet hive mind might be able to shed some light on the identities of his songs. As search tools improved, as internet communities grew in membership and activity, one by one the mystery songs began to relinquish their secrets. Some were identified by tip-offs from visitors to his Unknown Pleasures website. Some were discovered simply by typing the lyrics into Google. A few stragglers would eventually be picked up on Shazam. But of course, one song proved stubbornly, unyieldingly mysterious. Here it is. If you're listening on YouTube, you're only going to hear a short clip, but you can find the whole thing easily enough searching for the most mysterious song on the internet. So, there's polarised opinions on the song itself. Some people seem to think it's pretty boring and uninspiring. I think it kind of slaps, to be honest, although I do like that cold, distant, late 70s, early 80s sound. Anyway, life goes on, old interests are half forgotten, old obsessions fall by the wayside, and so it was with Darius and his last remaining unknown pleasure. According to the Spontes.de article, Tuesday, the 20th of August 2019, was a pretty run-of-the-mill day for Darius. But for one trivial yet crucial difference. He arrived home from work 5 minutes earlier than usual. Had he come in and switched on the radio at his usual time, he would have missed it. As it happened, he tuned in the middle of a telephone interview and heard the interviewee mentioning the bands Blancmange and Clan of Zymox. Those were two of his favourite acts from the 80s, so he paused in what he was doing and he turned to listen. The interviewee was talking about a track from an unknown artist, about trying to find the origins of a mysterious, nameless song. A situation for which Darius, of course, felt more than a little sympathy. And then the DJ played a recording of the song the interviewee was talking about. Darius was stunned. The song on the radio was his unknown song. The track he had labelled Blind the Wind. Was it possible that someone else had also completely independently of him become consumed with uncovering the mystery of this song? Did this man on the radio record it from the same show as him? You can just imagine how surreal and staggering it must have been for him to casually switch on the radio and hear that after all those decades. 30 years. Darius went online and found that there were now thousands of people searching for his song. And the version of the song he'd heard on the Radio 1 station was in fact his own recording. It turns out that in March 2007, while Darius was still actively hunting for the song, his sister Lydia had chipped in to aid in the search, posting a clip to a German language music research news group and thereafter to bestofeighties.de and spiritofradio.ca, whereupon the mystery generated some minor interest and discussion. The version of the song posted publicly by Lydia to these sites and also by Darius on his website was edited down to about 1 minute in length due to fears of running into copyright-related problems. But privately, at least one or two users of those sites who were engaged in the search and emailed Lydia to request further information were provided links to a full version she hosted on Lycos, if you remember Lycos. Jesus Christ, that's a blast from the past. So anyway, long story short, it seems to really have been Lydia's initial 2007 postings about the song, under the usernames Anton Riedel and Blue, with 3 or 4 U's, that truly lit the touch paper on what would eventually become the internet phenomenon that surrounds the song today. It didn't explode right away, not for several years in fact, but it sort of smouldered away on its own, the search passing from person to person, from forum to forum by word of mouth. And although Lydia finally drifted away from these forums and Darius's website eventually dropped offline with little fanfare, it was in the years that followed, the late 2000s, early 2010s, for the few souls that kept the fire going on this, it started to dawn that this was something really elusive. When you look back at the very earliest postings on this that still survive, Lydia's posts to de.rec.music.recherche, there's a sense like there's this new wave song I just can't put my finger on, someone here's going to know it, like it would turn out to be some obscure Sisters of Mercy B-side or something. But as time goes on, as technology improves, Shazam launched as a smartphone app in 2008. As more and more communities become involved, as more and more leads are followed up with no result, as more and more knowledgeable people become embroiled in the search, the frightening obscurity of the song becomes more and more apparent. And yet, it almost certainly played across the whole of northern Germany on NDR radio. And that dichotomy of both obscurity and nationwide broadcasting is really strange. And how many huge bands that fill stadiums struggle to get airplay on that scale. And here we have a band that we can only assume is not a huge band. And it's not completely out of the question that this is a little known recording from a big act, but that seems less and less likely as time goes on. Not only did it get national airplay, but no one else seems to remember hearing it. You can see why it's sometimes suggested, usually with tongue firmly in cheek, I want to stress, that this song is actually a huge hit record in a neighbouring dimension, and by some freak occurrence, a broadcast of it slipped through the walls of reality and was captured on tape by a teenager in Wilhelmshaven. I think a more likely explanation involves it coming across another, more literal kind of wall, but we'll come back to that. The truncated version of the song remained the only version in public circulation. In 2009, it was uploaded to What's That Song, which, as the name suggests, is a song naming community where people upload clips of music or themselves humming earworms that they can't identify via the usual channels. And it first found its way to YouTube in 2011, but aside from drawing a few more people into the search, nothing much of substance emerged from those. In September 2017, the search had by this time been going for over a decade. Nicolas Zuniga, the owner of Dead Wax Records, a Spanish indie record company, also uploaded the truncated version of the song to his label's YouTube channel. This upload generated a bit more interest, and specifically, it would be heard by a friend of Zuniga, Gabriel Vieira, who 2 years later, in 2019, would post the clip to a whole slew of subreddits. Tip of my tongue, RBI, Unresolved Mysteries, and this was where I, and I think thousands of other people, first encountered the mystery. The search finally went viral. Around this time, someone who had grabbed the full version from Lydia before her hosting went down, uploaded it, and the full version of the song was made available on YouTube for the first time. Since then, the song has been featured in radio and television. It's been covered by big YouTubers in videos with millions of views. There have been articles in Rolling Stone, there have been subreddits and wikis and Discords set up, thousands of leads have been followed, hundreds of bands have been investigated and ruled out. The DJ on Darius's favourite music show on NDR in the early 80s, Musik für junge Leute, was tracked down by researchers and actually became involved in the search himself. Paul Baskerville, an English emigrant to Germany, he didn't recall playing the song on his show, but it had been 35 years. He's still a DJ and currently presents a show called Nachtclub, and he played the song on his own show in 2019, and he also went on the station Radio 1 to give an interview about the mystery and play the song to a bigger audience. And while it didn't bring the hoped for answers, this was in fact the interview that just about blew Darius's socks off in August 2019 when he stumbled upon it unawares. He hadn't realised that the unknown man being interviewed was in fact the DJ he'd spent most of his teenage years listening to, who was now in turn talking about Darius's quest to find the song. This prompted Darius to tell Lydia, who then reached out to Gabriel Vieira and rejoined the search, uploading a complete version of the entire first side of the tape containing the mysterious song, giving researchers a sense of the context in which it was found, showing that there was no DJ intro to the song, at least in the surviving version, Darius's compilation. The vast meat search that has been taking place around this song for about 14 years now, or about 3 years on a larger scale, has failed to arrive at a definitive answer as to the identity of this song, but it has generated a vast amount of clues, leads, discoveries, theories, and candidates. Before anyone writes into us saying you've run it through Shazam and it's come back as belonging to such and such a band, the people who have attempted to claim it on Shazam and YouTube Music and so forth have been looked into very carefully, and it would appear that they're simply copyright opportunists trying to cash in on monetization from copyright hits in the knowledge that the original band are unknown, and if they're still alive they don't seem to be aware of the popularity online in order to put any claim to it. It's possible, but I tend to trust the amount of research people have put into these guys. I don't really want to libel anyone, but yeah, allegedly, and in my opinion, they're bullshit. Something similar goes for the guy trying to register the lyrics as his on the US Copyright Office. It's pretty certain that none of these are the real artists involved. I'll attach a link to the Google Docs spreadsheet with all current, dead and excluded leads. If you have a theory to put to the people researching this song, I'm sure they would love to hear it, but please do consult that spreadsheet first to ensure that your suggestion hasn't already been investigated and excluded. In the absence of answers coming from looking outward into the wider world of the music industry, some researchers have dug deep into the very sound of the recording itself in an attempt to uncover technical clues that could help narrow the search among the literally tens of thousands of 80s new wave bands that existed. One of the most interesting leads coming from this arm of the investigation is the discovery that the synthesizer used for the high-pitched synth riff heard over the chorus appears to be from a default patch shipped with the Yamaha DX7, specifically the patch Syn Lead 5. Now, there's always a very slight possibility that this is not the synthesizer used. High-end synths of this era were programmable. You could generate your own patches, and I've set up an emulated DX7 with this preset to test this out for myself. The synthesizer sound effect, which we get the best listen of during the outro where it's used to create this long sustained note, is identical in structure to the default setting of Syn Lead 5 on the DX7. Here it is on my emulated DX7. Notice it's not just a simple flat tone, there's a recognisable signature to it. Let's listen to that again, let's compare them again. When you hold down the key, the initial note eventually gives way to this higher pitched tone that oscillates. What do you call that sound? Is it like a vibrato or something? In any case, the pattern of it, the timing of the change in tone and everything is the same. It's very probably played on a DX7. And if it's not, then maybe someone trying to duplicate the DX7 Syn Lead 5 sound on another digital synthesizer. Why is this relevant? Well, because it helps put an earliest possible date on the creation of this song, and thus may help narrow down the large range of dates that need to be looked at. Yamaha released the DX7 in September or October 1983. Now, Darius is adamant that the songs on this particular tape were all recorded before the end of 1984. The remaining songs back this up. There's nothing released later than about October or November 1984. The range Darius initially gave for the recording date was originally 1982 to 1984, so this discovery has helped close that window a little bit. 1982 is out, most of 1983 is out, and in fact Darius more recently identified the tape recorder he used as one that was only released in 1984, so it's fairly certain, or at least very, very likely, that we are looking for something that played sometime in 1984. The DX7, by the way, when it came out, was about $2,000. In 1984 money, that's over $5,000 today. I'm not sure how relevant it is, but it does seem like it might take a little bit of weight away from the suggestion that this was a completely amateur teen garage band that was just sending out random demos to radio stations and got lucky. It doesn't preclude that, of course, and I'm sure there were a few wealthy upper middle class teenagers in West Germany that got DX7s for Christmas '83, but it does tip the scale slightly in the direction of this being a professional production. I don't mean it's by a chart-topping band or anything, but maybe a band made up of erstwhile session musicians, or a pub or club band, or the unknown side project of someone from like a mid-tier touring band, something like that. At the very, very least, it was a group that hired a well-stocked, up-to-date studio. Now, as you'll recall, Paul Baskerville, the DJ for Music for Junge Leute on NDR, became involved in the search in 2019, but it didn't end with just him. In the Rolling Stone article, it's noted that at that point, late 2019, archivists at NDR were looking into the case, but had found song listings from just a handful of Paul Baskerville's shows, and they were in the process of looking through them. Almost a year then went past with no further information. On July the 6th, 2020, noting the lack of updates, a Reddit user by the name of FlexOnMobile decided to email one of the archivists at the station purely on the off chance that they'd uncovered anything. Much to their surprise, they received a reply offering them the entire 1984 song list for Paul Baskerville's episodes of Music für junge Leute. Within a short time, all the tracks that had been played by Baskerville on that show in the year 1984 had been checked and excluded by researchers, either by being directly found and listened to or comparing track length. Now, that's a bit of a puzzler because Darius was pretty specific that he'd recorded this song from Music für junge Leute presented by Baskerville on NDR. So what does that mean? Is it poor record keeping by the station? Did they miss some titles? Did Paul play the wrong song by mistake? Both the archivist and Baskerville himself have stated that he would often bring in records from his own collection or tapes he borrowed from record shops to play. So did he announce one song and then accidentally load some other obscure record? Some of the recorded songs on the playlistings are crossed out. What does this mean? So is it a case of false memory on Darius's part? It has been decades since he taped it. Maybe he got it from another show, another station, or he's taped it from some non-radio source and he's misremembering. And no harm to Darius and Lydia, but there is also the potential line of thought that I'm sure has crossed lots of researchers' minds at various times, that just maybe there is some dishonesty going on. Maybe they're playing some long game troll on everyone. But I don't think so. Because in December 2020, Reddit user Flier uncovered yet another layer of technical clues hidden in the recording. On examining the audio spectrum of the mysterious song, Flier noted that there was an unusual line of decreased magnitude at 10,000 Hz. It looks like someone ran an eraser through the spectrograph at 10 kHz. Everything just below 10 kHz is loud and clear. Everything just above 10 kHz is loud and clear, but there's a line at 10 kHz where the audio at this one particular pitch appears to be artificially, selectively reduced in volume. You can't really hear it, but you can see it on the spectrograph as plain as day. This looks like an artifact produced by the radio station's equipment, but it could also have been caused by a slight fault or insensitivity in Darius's tape recorder. So, to rule this out, Flier looks at the other songs on the cassette, aware that most of these tracks Darius claimed to be from NDR, the NDR radio station, but that some tracks towards the end were known to have originated on the Dutch station Hilversum. The spectra of these Hilversum tracks lack this odd 10 kHz line. All the other songs on the tape, the songs he claimed to be from NDR, have it. It begins to look like the 10 kHz line is a feature of NDR broadcasts in the early 1980s, like a fingerprint almost. Some piece of equipment in the station or the transmitter was causing this, and therefore this could be used as evidence that certain recordings originated with that station. To confirm it, Flier tracked down other recordings of NDR programs from the time, taped on different equipment by different people with no connection to Darius, and sure enough, there's that same 10 kHz line that's not seen on other stations. So this proves, if it's not beyond reasonable doubt, it's certainly approaching it, that the unknown song did indeed originate on the NDR station from some program on there, if not necessarily Music für junge Leute. It should also be borne in mind that Paul Baskerville was only one of the presenters on that show that year. The NDR archivist only produced the song listings for Baskerville's episodes in the first instance, and noted that it would take some time to extract similar lists for others, as it requires manual searches of paper documents and whatnot. But now, song lists for the other Music für junge Leute DJs and the sister programs Der Club, No Wave and Nachtclub, all from NDR, are currently being researched. It's entirely possible, tantalisingly possible, that the mysterious song is on one of those. Who knows? We may very soon have an answer from those listings. And now, of course, whether it does or doesn't show up, this episode is going to age like milk. Another possible lead that's been a focus in the last few months is something called Der Popkurs, or the Pop Course. This is a short course run by Hochschule für Musik und Theater Hamburg, the Hamburg University of Music and Theatre, as a model experiment for popular music It's an incubator program, essentially. It's aimed at promising early career stage and recording artists in the pop, rock and jazz genres to develop their background in music theory, contract law, the ins and outs of the music industry and so forth. And it's a fairly big deal. HFMT Hamburg is a pretty prestigious institution. It's like a German equivalent to Juilliard or the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, and a lot of big German rock bands and pop groups have at least some members who have undertaken this course. Der Popkurs was founded in 1982, and the reason it's of interest in this mystery is the fact that one of the, modules Popkurs participants undertake is a songwriting project supervised by industry professionals. In addition to an end-of-year concert attended by music industry bigwigs, the tracks created by Popkurs students were played publicly on NDR as one of the perks of the course. What's more, according to users Travelin and Axie17 on Reddit, there were blocks of time on NDR allocated simply under the heading Popkurs. No individual songs listed, just this overarching Popkurs program heading. Might that explain the strange absence of a song listing for this track? At least, if one exists that hasn't been discovered so far. Popkurs recordings were made by talented, albeit maybe somewhat sophomoric young musicians that were just starting out, which probably matches up with the song itself. I mean, it's pretty catchy and effective, but it's not anything amazingly unique or any sort of virtuoso piece. They were produced using high-grade professional instruments and equipment, which would chime with the appearance of the expensive synthesizer on the song. They were made with professional producers and engineers, but because of the production line nature of it, perhaps not to the same level of finesse and perfectionism that you'd expect from a professional commercial pop song. Again, that kind of jives with the production value of this song. In this case, the song may in fact not have been by any particular band, and it's just an ad hoc group of students. Maybe this was never something that was released as its own record or ever intended to be. As we speak, several of the amateur detectives on the Mysterious Song subreddit and Discord are trying to track down former students who participated in Popkurs 1984 to see if any of them were involved in its creation or even just remembered hearing it played. That's an active thread that we could potentially see some movement on. There was one update that came from that though, and maybe not a particularly encouraging one. User Silberspiel managed to get in touch with singer Rainier Bielfeldt, a former graduate of the program, who forwarded the email to the producer who worked on all of Popkurs' studio recordings from 1982 to 1990. That producer, Mehmet Ergin, said the mysterious song was not familiar to him and that if he had produced it, he would have remembered it. Nothing's ever straightforward, is it? Nevertheless, according to a Reddit update from a couple of months ago, there's a user called Johnny Me Too who has made contact with an employee of the university who may be able to grant access to Der Popkurs' archives once the institution's COVID policy allows it. So that's something to keep an eye on. Another angle that I think is worth considering, as I sort of obliquely hinted at before, bearing in mind that this is long before the fall of the Berlin Wall, is could this be a record by an underground East German band or another European country behind the Iron Curtain? There's an interview in Lola magazine, you can find it online, with a former singer called Henrik Jerich, who was part of the Ostpunk scene in the late 70s, early 80s. That's the punk scene as it existed behind the Iron Curtain, in his case, in the GDR. He doesn't specifically talk about new wave music, which emerged in part from the punk scene, but he discusses at length how punks, and we can infer by extension members of related subcultures that were seen as either critical to the GDR regime or a conduit for Western capitalist ideas, were subject to, in some cases, quite severe persecution by the state. People were arrested and spent weeks in jail, records were confiscated and destroyed, bands were infiltrated by Stasi agents, there was paranoia and violence. It sounds like an absolute shit show, but there was also creativity and romance to it. In an interview in Tribune Mag, journalist Chris Bone talks about going to research a series of articles on underground music in the Soviet bloc. He talks about being taken to outdoor black markets where banned records were sold and being trailed by police informants in Czechoslovakia, and there does seem to have been a rich scene in East Germany from which such a song could have emerged, possibly as a demo smuggled over the border and duplicated. That might explain why there seems to be a bit of a smokescreen around the band's identity, if they were a group that wanted to share their music but didn't necessarily want to advertise their existence. Some listeners claim to hear an East German accent in the vocals too, some think they hear Polish accent. One issue with this theory though is that the Yamaha synth wouldn't have been widely available in the GDR. In fact, Western and Japanese consumer products were de facto banned. One place that is known to have had the DX7 in spite of this ban is the East German Academy of Arts. So there is a sort of counterpart theory to the Popkurs thing, that maybe it was produced by students from there. I'm not too sure about that, but who knows, it's worth looking at. A particularly amusing facet of this mystery is that there are at least 3 or 4 bands, or members of bands, claiming responsibility for the mysterious song, all completely separately and all quite adamantly. And it's one of these things where it's like, why would you lie about that? There's so many people looking into this. It's a sort of mystery that will be solved one day. I'm pretty confident of that. Anyone can see, unless it truly is from another dimension, there will be a paper trail, or there will be a demo discovered, or there will be some evidence come to light. So why would you expose yourself to the humiliation of potentially being caught out in a lie so publicly? And yet, these claimants to the title can't all be telling the truth, so some of them must be lying. Austrian musician Ronald Frederick Ereshek, also known by the stage name Ronnie Urini or Urini, I'm not sure how he's pronouncing that, and sometimes also going by the name Ronnie Rocket, has claimed online to have recorded the song in early 1984 with vocalist Christian Brandl, who sadly passed away in 1987, with producer and keyboardist Fred Jaksch, also long gone, and Heinz Hochreiner, an alto saxophonist who, Ronnie claims, didn't play on the version we hear but was present for the recording at Jaksch's studio on Maria Hilferstrasse in Vienna. He claims the song, called Like the Wind, was never actually fully completed. The keyboard tracks were in a stopgap form, choral sections were to be recorded, and Hochreiner was supposed to add a saxophone solo at a later date, which never came to pass. What found its way onto NDR was, to quote Ronnie Urini, probably an intermediate mix on cassette that was quickly pulled from the mixing table. Very common. And Urini has recently registered ownership of the song in Austria, and he presents online a lyric sheet and 2 supposed demos for songs he worked on with the same band, the Underground Corpses, as evidence for this claim. However, there are reasons to be very, very sceptical of Urini's assertions here. First of all, as Axie17 points out on Reddit, quote, "We have no clue what the qualifications are to file something in the Austrian copyright system, and we don't want to commit any kind of copyright fraud to find out." So it may be as simple as filling out a couple of forms. It's not clear what evidence, if any, he had to provide in order to register it. The lyric sheets, which are provided for both an English and a German version of the unknown song, are kind of bizarre, and they read not unlike someone trying to back transcribe what they hear in the lyrics without actually paying attention to meaning, if that makes sense. Some really sketchy nonsense lyrics in places that don't seem to match up all that well with what's heard on the recording. The demos, entitled City of Glass and Steel, don't sound all that much like the mystery song. The vocalists are kinda similar, but that's about it, to my ear anyway. The only third party who is around to back up Urini's claims is his close friend Heinz Hochreiner, the alleged saxophonist. Now 63, Hochreiner was interviewed over the telephone by journalist Armin Linder, and he basically said that yes, he was there for the second of 3 planned recording sessions at the studio. At the third session he was supposed to play the saxophone solo, but it never happened. Essentially backing up what Urini said, Linder, however, cautions that he didn't actually verify the identity of the man he spoke to on the phone. He could only be sure that he didn't think it was Urini himself. The real glaring issue, though, the issue that throws all of these other aspects into a really bad light and withdraws the benefit of the doubt for me, is that Urini, much like Doc Holliday in our Loch Ness episodes, has a long and storied reputation as a blatant trickster and hoaxer. His own Wikipedia page, translated from the German, states, Urini appears day and night with a pair of Ray-Ban sunglasses and has built a myth around his figure through the inextricable blending of truth and fiction. That's what he does, that's his whole shtick. And there are several journalistic pieces, including one found by Darius himself in an issue of Specs magazine as early as 1986, discussing Urini's habit of trying to take personal credit, original composition credits, for cover versions or adapted versions of songs by other artists. Axie 17 sums up this claim as Ronnie Rocket and his blast off the planet bullshit. Another pretender to the mystery crown is Aris Avarinos, bassist of the 80s Greek synth rock band Blue Light. He claims, or rather someone claiming to be him claims, the song was an early collaboration between the bands Blue Light, Villa 21 and The Mushrooms, all bands that verifiably existed, with Blue Light's singer Oannis, also known as Socrates Papahatsis, handling the vocals. Aris states that there were actually 4 versions of the song, 4 demos, of which the version that played on NDR was just one. According to Aris, the song is called Excommunication. What's interesting about Aviarinos' story is he backs it up by providing one of these alternate versions of the song, or what he asserts to be one of those alternate takes, a slightly extended instrumental version with some other minor differences. Let's have a listen. There we go. It's an interesting claim, but I think most of the searchers are not particularly convinced. The instrumental version sounds pretty suspect. There's a lot of distortion, and that could just be tape degradation, or it's an effect intended to sound like tape degradation, or it's been run through some old broken analog equipment to mask a much more modern digital production. Certainly to my ear, the guitar tone sounds quite different. The drums sound quite a bit different. It could pass for an old chewed up tape, but it doesn't particularly sound like it was recorded by the same people in the same studio at the same session in 1984 with the same instruments and equipment. It's worth noting that nearly 2 months went by between the time Aris was first contacted by Reddit user Directions to the Courthouse and him posting this alternate version. Plenty of time for a professional musician to have put together his own recording. Add to this the photograph he provides, supposedly the original tape containing the demo. It's a Memorex DBS-90, a model of cassette that doesn't seem to have arrived on the market until at least 1987, 3 or 4 years after he claims to have recorded it. Now, yeah, it could be a copy he had made at a later date, it's just, again, ever so slightly suspect. What's odd, also, is that his claim title, Excommunication, seems to be based on the sound of one of the lyrics at the end of the second verse, and yeah, you can kind of hear that if you listen a certain way, But have a listen to this processed version of the mysterious song with everything but the vocals filtered out, uploaded to YouTube by LuigiFan777. It's a bit easier to discern there without the instruments. It's still not perfectly legible. It could be there's no sense communicating, or there's no scent communication, or what I hear as communication could be several shorter words all running together. It could be there's no sense of something something. But what is quite definitively not present is the sound X. He's clearly not saying the word excommunication. Of course, the song could be called Excommunication regardless. The title doesn't have to appear in the song, but it just strikes me as someone latching on to a misheard lyric, you know. Most damningly though, user Camspiracy was able to get in touch with Socrates Ioannis Papahatsis, the alleged singer, and he denies having sung on the track or knowing anything about it. So, unless something more solid comes up, this is another claim to take with a pinch of salt. Perhaps the most well-known and controversial contender, or pretender, depending on your point of view, is another Greek new wave band called Statues in Motion. This group was formed in the summer of '81 and released one self-titled LP in 1983. They were a promising young band. They had a recording contract on the Three Eggs record company. That name is rubbish and it makes it sound like it was run out of some guy's loft, but actually this label was a Greek distributor for the likes of Boney M, Chris Rea, The Village People, Nina Simone. It wasn't a two-bob operation, it was a proper record company. And Statues in Motion had a proper recording contract, and their stuff is pretty good. Unfortunately, by the time the 1983 album hit shelves, the band itself had actually split up and scattered across the four corners of Europe. According to keyboardist Billy Knight, this stemmed from the recording label dragging their heels on releasing the album for over a year, which Knight attributes to putting a strain on the band members who all decided to move on to other things elsewhere. Knight moved on to England, and it was only after he'd arrived there that he heard the album had finally been released. Meanwhile, Albin Dean, the singer, a Greek-Australian whose real name was Georgios Dalampiras, apparently moved to Germany, and Knight and the other band members lost touch with him. From what I can gather, Statues in Motion originally came onto the searcher's radar simply because Albin Dean sounds quite like the singer of the mysterious song, really quite like the singer, but when contacted by Reddit user Gab Gaskins in 2019 and asked whether Statues in Motion created the mysterious song, Billy Knight replied that they had not. Case closed. You'd think. A short time later, in January 2020, a Facebook user called Brian Jahan posted a link to the mysterious song onto Statues in Motion's Facebook page, apparently run by Billy Knight, and asked straight up, "Is this your song?" This time the reply came back, "How did you come across it?" So the background of the mystery was explained to him, and then 10 months went by without a reply from Knight. Eventually, in November 2020, a user asked, was it so difficult to get a yes or no answer? To which Statues in Motion, presumably Knight, answered with a simple, all caps, yes. So, Billy Knight is now claiming Like the Wind is a Statues in Motion track. He's done an interview with Camspiracy talking about it, and he gives a pretty credible account, at least superficially credible, of how it all came to be. He claims that Like the Wind was one of 5 unused tracks held back from the Statues in Motion album because they didn't have room on the record for them. The others were Pinky Complex, Broken Dreams, and 2 others he's since forgotten the titles to because he wasn't much involved in writing lyrics or singing, only the music. He says the reason he initially denied knowing of the song when he was first sent it was he simply didn't listen to it. He had no expectation that his half-forgotten, unused songs would ever have reached the public, and I guess he thought the most mysterious song on the internet was an actual title he didn't recognise rather than just a descriptor. It was only when he kept being sent links to it, he figured he'd better check out what the fuss was, and then was surprised to discover it was one of his. Knight believes Albin Dean took the tapes of the unused songs with him to Berlin, and perhaps through a friend of a friend, a copy found its way to Paul Baskerville or another DJ on NDR. In my opinion, the actual songs I've heard from Statues in Motion don't sound particularly like the Mysterious song. The rhythm and the compositions from Statues in Motion are a lot more flowing. I didn't hear that particular guitar tone anywhere. The soundscape in general just feels different. There's a level of consistency from song to song within the album that isn't shared with the Mysterious song. Having said that, Albin Dean's vocals are, to my ear, absolutely the closest I've heard to the vocals on the Mystery song, without a doubt. I'm not saying it's him, but he sounds just like him. There are a lot of singers in this genre, in this era, whose style is in that ballpark, that sort of low David Bowie, Ian Curtis timbre. There's a style of singing that can have a tendency to make different vocalists sound a bit alike, especially if the production or recording isn't the best, but Albin immediately jumps out as sounding almost exactly like the Mysterious singer. Let's hear a wee comparison, shall we? I find this lead more compelling than the other couple I've talked about, if nothing else just because of this similarity in the vocalists and how genuine and straightforward Billy Knight comes across in interview. That's not to say I believe it. In fact, I would probably say I'm about only 10% convinced of a Statues in Motion connection, though that is a higher percentage than I'd give for any of the other claimants. There are problems with this theory too. There is, quite frankly, a lack of anything but the most circumstantial of evidence linking Statues in Motion to the Mysterious song. In the interview with Camspiracy, Billy Knight mentions that the song, along with the rest of the album, was recorded in 1982. This puts it 2 years before the launch of the Yamaha DX7. Knight, in fact, states that he played the Yamaha SK10 and CS15 synths here, which aligns with the time period, but those are older analog subtractive synthesizers, quite different to the digital DX7. It's not impossible that he could get the SK10 or the CS15 to sound just like that one synth patch on the DX7, but what are the chances? You know, it's a pretty precise sound. He couldn't be trying to emulate it because in 1982 it didn't exist yet, so what? He arrived at it by chance? It's not impossible, but I haven't been able to hear those sounds used elsewhere on the Statues in Motion album, who also, incidentally, use a drum machine all throughout the album. The Mysterious song uses real drums, so it all just doesn't sit too straight for me. Unfortunately, most of the remaining members have sadly passed away since the 80s. The one person who would be able to confirm or deny Billy Knight's account, and possibly even solve the whole mystery, is Albin Dean himself, but his whereabouts, as it turns out, are a mystery in their own right. Knight and the others lost contact with Dean after he left for Germany. He doesn't appear to be on social media today. There are persistent rumours that he died of a drug overdose in the 80s, but that has never been confirmed and seems like just an unsupported statement that's been parroted around. A grave record for a George Dallambiros who died in the late 80s back in Australia was discovered, but this has since been ruled out as Albin Dean, and it was revealed to be a much older man in his 60s. There are rumours he's alive and living in the US or Australia. It doesn't help that he went by a few different names and travelled around a lot. He could be living out there under a slightly different identity, who knows. The last evidence we have of his existence are some bits and pieces of songs he recorded in early '84 after the breakup of Statues in Motion, before he moved away to Germany. After that, nothing. It's like he dropped off the face of the earth. One theory that could account for both the similarity in vocals, Billy's claim about Statue in Motion's involvement, at least the fact that he recognises the song, and the different instrumentation to the rest of the album, is that on moving to Berlin, Albin Dean may have briefly formed another band, or joined another band, or buddied up with some other musicians there, and re-recorded the old, unused Statues in Motion song with the new group, in a studio with a DX7 and a real drum kit. It could well be the case, but until he's found, or other evidence for this is uncovered, there's just nothing to corroborate that. After the death of Ellie Kane, the principal songwriter of Statues in Motion in 2017, Billy Knight organised and promoted a memorial concert in his honour, and he says he hoped that Albin Dean would hear of it and attend, but he never did. Billy says he's tried absolutely everything to contact him without success. Certainly, if he had at any point in the last few years looked up himself or his old band online, he would now be aware of the situation. But it's entirely possible he is still alive and he's just not much of an internet user. In fact, this is something that's come up a few times in the search. Lots of people who were young musicians in the industry in the early 80s just don't seem to get along with the internet now. But if that's the case, or even if he is dead, you'd think eventually a family member or a friend aware of his time in the band would eventually stumble upon this. And maybe that will happen. Maybe it's just a waiting game. Whether the song originates from Statues in Motion or one of these other bands or someone else entirely, as tantalising and as alluring as the mystery is, I think it will be solved. I think it will be sooner or later. The overwhelming majority of humans on Earth have not heard the mysterious song, and it continues to spread on the internet, so I think it will eventually land on the right pair of ears. I think it is a numbers game. If you put a gun to my head, I think the real band is probably not among the ones we featured here. I do think there's a chance Statues in Motion were involved, but on balance I think it's probably some unknown small-time band from Germany or Poland or Austria or Scandinavia or somewhere around there who sent in a demo and had it played. And maybe the DJ forgot to record the title, or it's just not been found yet in the listings. But I think it will come to light. I do think it will. I know there will be people who say, so what? Who cares? As anyone who's ever played in a small local band will tell you, and this is when Mike being here would be quite useful, because I know he did play in quite a few small local bands around Glasgow. There are a million unknown bands out there, a million bands that shopped demos around or sold a few dozen CDRs or cassettes at gigs, never cut a proper record, that are almost completely forgotten today. And bigger bands too. You know, one thing that looking at this mystery has really driven home to me, looking through these cross-referenced NDR playlists and leafing through the international discography of the New Wave 1982 to 83, this huge 700-page tome of band listings and discographies, there are hundreds of smallish bands that had actual followings and released albums and EPs and demos that are absolutely teetering on being completely lost and forgotten today. Bands with outrageous names like God and the Turds, bands with boring names like James, not the rock band from Manchester, a new wave band from the USA. Absolute mountains of them. Even in my own life, I remember going a number of times to see a friend of a friend's band in Glasgow, a band called Red Snowman, early to mid 2000s. They were fucking great. They played big pub gigs with hundreds of people in attendance. I used to have like signed CDs from them. I think I had a t-shirt. Nowadays, I think the CDs are gone. I lost them in a house move or something, or they got scratched and I threw them out. I couldn't sing you any of their songs. I don't really remember. If you look them up online, there's a defunct MySpace page with nothing on it and a couple of fleeting mentions and comments and stuff. But there's no songs on YouTube or anywhere else, no pictures, they're just gone. And yeah, you know, quite likely the mysterious song is just one of those cases. A cool band that came and sadly went in a short space of time, and maybe they had a few fans but otherwise didn't make much impact on the history books. they were just lucky enough to get played on the radio once or twice. But who knows? I think what's so enticing about the mystery is not just the existence of a song no one knows the name of, or a band that's been forgotten. As I say, there's a million of those out there. Although I have to admit, reading all of those obscure band names does give me an itch to find out more about them. But it's something else. Well, it's two things really. For one, it's the song itself. The song I think it's pretty good. It's pretty catchy, and it has something about it that invites a sense of familiarity. Most people who hear it think they've heard it before or something like it. There's almost a faint déjà vu associated with it. And maybe that's just because it's so typical of its genre, I don't know. Whatever it is, it seems to hit that familiarity button really, really well. For two, it's the story of how it was found. It hooks into that nostalgic shared memory that lots of people have of their adolescent years, exploring new music, new genres, whether that's making mixtapes from songs on the radio like Darius S, or raiding your mum's record collection, or delving into YouTube or Napster if you're around my age. Every generation has their own version of that and can relate to the background of it. And many of us remember being bugged by a song we can't place, or a scene from a film we can't quite name, so we instinctively empathise, we know the feeling. And yet we have this false instinct, especially these days, that the problem should be easily solvable, that with just the right search keywords surely we can find the answer. That's how people get drawn into it. We're simply not used to the answers not being readily available online. But once again, I do think we'll have an answer eventually. It'll take more than a Google search, but it'll happen. Of every unsolved mystery we've covered on Talking Till Dawn, I think this is the most likely to be solved. And when that happens, there are indeed thousands more Lostwave tracks out there waiting to ensnare the curious. Before I head off into the sunrise, I wanted to say hello and thank you to those who have written us reviews, commented on YouTube and reached out on Twitter, and generally just been awesome. Bishop, Chandler Engels, Real Tampa, Jeff Ashley, Steve O'Murtaugh, Michael Kolai, Ojin Akusao, Missy F, Dom M, Jay Samuels, Anna Rice, JPK, Rasa, Dylan Smith, Rinaldi, Sir Andre Lafayette de Linoz, sorry if I mispronounced that, Rick Dunn, Prepper Grandma, Derek Simpson, C Rib, Christina Barton and Nopety Nope, Taco Tuesday, Polly Air, Nini6816 and Magarathea Johnson for their iTunes reviews, and everybody on Patreon, thank you all. And remember, one of the best ways anyone can support the show is to tell a friend, spread the word, and to those who've done so, I raise a glass in thanks. We'll be back next month with Michael back with me if circumstances allow, touch wood, but for now, the sun is coming up. Take care.